In today's video, we're going to look at 25 different strategic ideas and maneuvers that you must know if you play the Italian. We will cover main ideas, common patterns, and strategic motifs that will level up your game in this opening. Timestamps are in the description. Enjoy the video. So the Italian opening starts after e4, e5, knight to f3, attacking the pawn on e5, knight to c6, defending it, and bishop to c4. Now, from this position, there are two theoretical moves by black, two main moves, and there are a bunch of sidelines. The main moves are bishop to c5 and knight to f6. But first of all, let's talk about this setup with white. So white has a main plan in this position and various other sort of side plans, let's call them. The main plan in this position is to execute this move d4. For example, if our opponent plays a random move, let's say h6, and the reason why I'm picking h6 is because it is a very common move controlling this g5 square. The plan that we want to go for is playing d4. After d4, all of our pieces open up and we will get a very active position. For example, in this position, we have a very nice game. We are very active. Let's say our opponent plays like bishop to e7. Let's just say a bit passive here. We can castle, we can play knight f5. We have a bunch of different options. We have more space and we have a more comfortable game. So this is what we want to go for. From here, then on, we can build up on our advantage. The goal of the opening is to execute this move d4 and liberate your pieces. This is the main goal of the opening. The bishop on c4 is very active. It assists on this diagonal. It pressures this pawn on f7, and this is going to be another key theme in this opening, and we will talk about this more later on. And another detail that I want you guys to catch is that if I go back, as I said, two theoretical moves here are bishop c5 and knight f6. Both of them fight against d4. So bishop c5 controls d4 directly. So this is just a very simple to understand because bishop on c5 controls d4. And knight on f6 controls d4 indirectly because it creates a threat on this pawn on e4. And if you play a move like d3, let's say, protecting this pawn, now you're not going to be playing d4 at least right away because you wasted a move with d3. So both of these moves fight against the d4, pawn to d4, in different ways and actually lead to completely different games. Nevertheless, the main goal, remember, is to execute this move d4 and liberate all of your pieces where you will have very nice active play. Another very common theme that you have to remember in these positions is attacking f7. The bishop is already placed on c4. It is a perfect placement for the bishop in order to pressure this pawn on f7, and the knight in a lot of positions can go to g5, attacking this pawn right away, which can lead to a lot of crazy positions. So in this position, the main move for black is this move d5, blocking this way for the bishop, and after pawn captures, knight captures is actually a slight mistake, but this is a very common trap. I guess, yeah, you can call this a trap. This is a very common trap that people fall for, and now we can detonate the fried liver attack with something like knight to f7, and then we can go queen to f3, and in a lot of these positions, black might even blunder checkmate, and we are winning here. This position is mate in a couple of moves, mate right now, actually. So this is a very nice way to win the game. Of course, a lot of your opponents are going to know this, and they're not going to fall for this. The main thing that you have to remember is to pressure the pawn on f7, and keep an eye on this, because in a lot of positions, this pawn is very, very delicate and it cannot be defended. So this is a secondary idea in this opening right after the main idea, which is to execute d4. Idea number 3 is going to be put pressure on the pinned knight. So in this position, we have a bishop on g5 pinning this knight on f6. And a very simple mistake to make in this position would be to play this move castles, because after castles, we can jump our knight to the center, putting more pressure on this knight. The knight cannot be taken because then black would lose the queen, and there is simply no way to deal with this pin. This bishop cannot magically teleport back to e7. If it could, the position would be fine for the black pieces. However, because black played d6, there's no way back for this bishop, bishop, which means that this structure will get damaged no matter what happens. So for example, if bishop to e6 is played, we can go either knight takes or bishop takes, and then we can, let's say, put the bishop on h6, attacking this rook right here. A very common move in these types of positions is this move h6. However, this also fails to knight takes f6, pawn takes f6, and not only you're damaging your structure here, you're also losing this pawn on h6. So this would be a completely winning position for the white pieces. Let's say rook to e8, and in this position knight to h4 can be played, and white will start some sort of an attack on this side of the board, whether that is with like queen f3, queen g3, queen h5. There are many options for the white queen. As I said earlier, the main idea of the opening is to execute d4. Now in this position, our e4 pawn is under attack. We still can play this move d4. It goes into a different variation. However, the main theoretical move in this position is this move d3. Now, the reason why this is the main theoretical move and not knight c3 instead, because this looks more natural, right? We are also developing a piece and defending the pawn at the same time. However, this runs into a center pawn fork, and in this position, black has this move knight takes e4, and after knight takes e4, black plays d5, forking both of our pieces, and after we go bishop to d3, pawn takes e4, bishop takes e4, we get into this position. Now, black is not winning here, however, black has a very comfortable game because both bishops are open and black gets a lot of active play with this tactic. So in this position, even though it is technically equal, it is very difficult to play for an advantage with the white pieces, and you have better options when it comes to playing this opening. This position, despite being equal, it is not exactly comfortable for the white pieces. So what I would say is avoid this center pawn fork. Don't run into this. Always make sure you're not running into this center pawn fork, and make sure that you're defending your position properly. Idea number 5 is going to be don't waste any time, especially with the black pieces. So in this position, white can play this move pawn to d4, and after e takes d4, c takes d4, our bishop is under attack. Now we can move this bishop to a couple of different places. For example, we can go to e7, we can go to b6, we can go to b4. However, the correct move is to go to b4 and give a check. And the reason why we go to b4 is because it is check. And that's very important because we cannot lose any time. If we go back to e7, let's say, now it is white to move, and white can play e5, white can play d5, kick our knights out, and there's nothing we can do here unless we just lose the knight. Like e5, if we just ignore this, we're gonna lose the knight. So we cannot ignore these threats, we have to deal with them. However, it is best to avoid all of this because we don't want to run into any of these problems. That's why we play this move bishop to b4, and we give a check. By giving a check, it's white to move, but white has to respond to our move. And in this position, there are many ways to continue. There's bishop d2, knight d2, knight c3. All of these are theoretical moves. Let's just say bishop to d2. And here we would go into this type of variation. And even though the line is still quite complicated here, it might look scary. However, after queen e7 here, we are threatening discoveries. We're threatening the queen. Once the queens are off the board, we are totally safe as the black pieces. So we cannot lose any time at all. We have to be very, very forceful, and that is why Italian is so dangerous, because if you make even a small inaccuracy, even if you play bishop to b6 here, after e5 you run into a lot of trouble because your knight is in a very vulnerable position, or it could be for many other reasons as well. Make sure to not waste any time. So idea number 6 is going to be about two pieces being better than a rook and a pawn. So in this position, let's say white plays this move knight to g5, attacking this pawn along with this bishop. Black simply castles away, just simply castles, protecting the pawn on f7. A very common move here that is played at lower levels is this move knight takes f7. After rook takes f7, bishop takes, king takes, we get this position right here. So white just has traded off two minor pieces, the knight that was on f3 and the bishop that was on c4, for a pawn and a rook. Is this a good trade for white or is it good for black? 99% of the time, this trade is going to be beneficial for black. Why? First things first, this position right now is not open. There are no open files here, so the rooks are very closed for both sides. The rooks are not active. That means that for the time being, the minor pieces are going to be more valuable than the rooks. Secondly, these are the two active pieces that white has, the only two active pieces that white has. And if white just simply trades them away, now white is left with no active pieces while black still has three minor pieces developed. So this is simply going to be better for the black pieces. Even if we continue this game, what will happen is that both sides will simply continue to develop, but black is always going to be more active. The rooks are not doing anything, so your extra rook as the white pieces is not going to be felt unless you create open lines and open files for your rooks. But if you're unable to do that, then your position will forever be worse. And of course, black will try to stop you from doing that. So make sure, let me just go back here, do not trade off two minor pieces for a rook and a pawn. Two minor pieces are better in these types of positions. So you're going to be under this pin quite a lot. So how do we deal with it? Now, first things first, what you need to remember is that you need to be very careful when playing moves like h3 and g4, because after h3 and g4, what happens is that black can sacrifice the knight on g4 for these two pawns in order to maintain this pin. This is extremely dangerous because the bishop has already gone to c4, the pawn has already been pushed to d3. That means that the bishop cannot go back to e2 to break this pin. So this pin is going to be here pretty much forever. Now, there are some threats here that you have to stop with the white pieces. For example, you have to stop this knight to d4 move. So bishop to e3 is forced, and this sequence is forced right here. You go back. But the problem is these positions are always going to be slightly better for the black pieces because black will simply play c6 and d5, bring the rook to e6, bring the rook over, and this is going to be extremely dangerous for the white pieces. For example, the game can go something like this. c6, d5 blocks out this bishop. Once this happens, the rook goes out to e6. Earlier, it could not do that because the bishop was protecting that square. However, after d5, the bishop no longer protects that square. And after a move like a6 and then bishop to a4, even the queen goes out to f6, pressuring this, captures. The rook is coming to f8, and this is an extremely dangerous position for the white pieces. It's actually just straight up completely lost. So you need to be very, very careful. Let me just go back here. You need to be very, very careful when you play moves like h3 and g4, because this pin right here could be deadly. In order to avoid these bishop g5 pins altogether, you can play h6 or h3 if you're playing from the white side prophylactically. You can play it very, very quickly. Even here, playing h6 here is a fine move. This is a very reasonable decision to make. And when you play h6, you're not allowing this bishop to go to g5, and you kill that option for the white pieces. Now white is forced to do something else. So if you're really worried about this pin on g5 or the pin on g4, if you're playing with the white pieces, play h6 or h3 prophylactically. Idea number 9 is going to be doubled e-pawns can be very useful. So in this position, if you play this move bishop to e6, let's say white exchanges on e6 and gives you these doubled pawns on the e-file. This might look bad at first for black. However, it's actually not bad at all because now the f-pawn is controlling the square on d5. It's also controlling the square on f5, and you have a semi-open f-file. So this transformation of the position actually benefits the black pieces. Just because these pawns are doubled does not mean that they are bad. The pawn on e6 also supports d5 pawn break in a lot of positions. So you need to be very, very careful with the white pieces. So if you want to play this position for an advantage, you don't want to be making this exchange as the white pieces. This is simply beneficial for black. Idea number 10 is going to be knight a5, knight takes c4 maneuver. So in this position, let's say white plays this move, knight to c3. Knight c3 is considered to be a bit of a suboptimal move in this position because of this move, knight to a5. After knight to a5, you cannot do anything to keep this bishop on the board. This exchange will benefit the black pieces. For example, you can drop the bishop back to b3. However, we will exchange it with the black pieces. We will go knight takes b3, pawn takes b3, and then we can even play a move like a6, creating a square for our bishop, so white does not do the same thing, and we will have the bishop pair as the black pieces. This is positionally beneficial for black, or for whoever side manages to trade off the bishop. So after knight to a5, let's say the bishop doesn't go back to b3, let's say bishop goes to b5 instead. This is actually even worse, because after c6, let's say bishop to a4, you can go b5, and here after bishop to b3, you are still going to trade this bishop off, or trade the knight for the bishop. Once again, this is still beneficial for the black pieces. It's even better because this pawn push c6 and b5 is beneficial for black as well. So this variation is even better. But remember to trade off your knight for this bishop on c4 in order to get the bishop pair. Idea number 11 is going to be attacking with your h and g pawns. So in this position, the black king has not castled, which is very, very important. That means that we can play h6 and then we can play g5, and we don't have to worry about knight takes g5, because after h takes, bishop takes, there's rook g8, and there are many, many ideas. For example, if h4, we can always sack this rook, for example, and go for an attack, which is an idea in this position. However, going back to this position right here, after g5, let's say our opponent plays bishop to g3. Now we can develop and do other things. However, the best option that we have here in this position with the black pieces is this move h5, trying to play h4 and trap the bishop. If our opponent takes the pawn, we still go h4, the bishop is still trapped. So the way you would deal with this is with either h3 or h4. Let's say h4 is played, here we can go bishop to g4, and in this position after h takes g5, we go h4 anyways, and we get a monstrous attack on our opponent. This is completely devastating. The pawn on f2 is hanging, and there's still a pin here. Queen f6, queen h6 is coming. This is absolutely vicious. And if instead of h4, let's say h3 is played, that's not a problem either. After h4, bishop to h2, our attack still continues with something like g4, and we get a position like this, which is very, very comfortable for the black pieces. Black will definitely be attacking white here. You might even play moves like queen d7 and queenside castle. Just get the queen out of here. Let's say rook to e1. You can do a lot of different things. You can play queen d7 and just simply castle queenside, and then continue your attack with these pawns right here, with this h pawn. So these two pawns, h and g pawns, are very useful when it comes to attacking this king. Okay, now let's go back to the knight a5, knight c4 maneuver that we were talking about earlier, but let's discuss how we can avoid it with the white pieces. So first things first, what you have to notice is when black plays this move d6. This is very important because d6 defends the pawn on e5, which means that knight a5 is now enabled. So going back, if knight a5 is played in this position, black loses this pawn on e5, and after knight c4, this is going to be a better position for the white pieces, for the simple reason that white is up a pawn. So going back here, let me just quickly go back. After d6, now this idea is finally enabled, and here we should play this move c3 with the white pieces, because after we play c3, we can always drop this bishop back to b3 and c2. For example, if our opponent plays knight to a5 now, that would be a huge huge mistake because we go bishop to b5 check, c6, and then we go bishop to a4, and now we can always go back. As a matter of fact, b4 is a huge threat, so the only move in this position is b5, and then the position gets very complicated here. This is another very complicated line that black can go for, but this is winning for the white pieces. The idea of c3 is that you create a square for the bishop, and you can go bishop b5 check in a lot of positions, just like this, in order to remaneuver the bishop back here, or you can go back to b3 voluntarily and then drop the bishop back to c2. This move c3 not only supports d4, but it also creates a getaway square for the bishop, and this is very important. Another very important idea that you should remember is queenside expansion, especially with the white pieces. So in this position, instead of playing a move like rook to e1 or knight to d2, we can start by playing this move b4. And after a move like bishop to b6, we can even go a4, taking as much space on this side of the board as possible. And this makes it just a little bit more difficult for our opponent to fight back. If they go a6, for example, we can always go a5 and get this structure, which is very comfortable because black struggles to go for any pawn breaks in these sorts of positions. And if they go a5, which is a stronger option here for black, we go b5, push the knight back, and this is another type of position that you can go for with white. And in my opinion, this is more comfortable for white, but it is a double-edged sword because black can also fight back here in these types of positions with moves like c6. So be careful, know your options, and know the ideas that you can go for, but definitely keep this idea of queenside expansion in your mind. So idea number 14 is going to be push e5 when the e5 pawn is gone for the white pieces. So in this position, let's say white plays this move d4. After e takes d4, we have a couple of different options here. We can take back on d4, but we can also push e5. Now after e5, the only good way to reply to this move with the black pieces is to strike back with d5 instead of doing something else, for example, moving the knight. d5 is the only move, because if you don't play d5, if you just simply go back, now white will castle and white will get a lot of development. As a matter of fact, I believe queen d5 here is extremely dangerous, and this is just a winning position. Knight takes c3. This is very, very active for the white pieces, and you're really struggling to do anything here with black. So you don't want to be going for positions like this, and if white pushes e5, you want to reply with d5 as black, but this is the way the game can go. So always be careful. Make sure to use your e-pawn in order to get rid of this knight, and if you're on the receiving end here, and if you're playing with the black pieces, make sure to reply appropriately. Another idea that you need to know in these types of positions is that this knight can sometimes get stuck in the center of the board. For example, a very common mistake here would be this move knight to e4. And the way you refute this move knight e4, there's only one good move in this position, and that move is bishop to d5, threatening to win the knight. Now in this position, the knight is trapped, but there are some things you can try to do in order to try to rescue this knight or try to defend it. If you go for knight takes f2, unfortunately, yes, the king is going to be slightly weak after going to g3, but the bishops are very powerful in these types of positions. The knight is protecting the king, so the queen cannot go out here in order to pose any problems to this king. This is a very safe position for the white pieces. Even though it looks a little bit dangerous, there are no problems here for the white king. Going back though, a better attempt for the black pieces would be something like f5. But after f5, we're not going to take this. We're not even going to go en passant because that doesn't really do anything. The knight just goes back. Instead of all of that, we will just simply castle here. And after a move like knight to e7, attacking the bishop, we will just go back. And this king cannot castle because the bishop is controlling the g1 square. So in this position, there are not a lot of good options that you can go for with the black pieces. Let's say you go d takes c3. After knight takes c3, knight takes, pawn takes. this is already going to be devastating, because after d6, knight to g5, now the bishop and the knight team up. And if you dare to take this pawn, we're not even going to go knight f7, we're actually going to go bishop f7, and then queen d8 is checkmate on the next move. So this knight right here on e4 is usually trapped here, and either you're going to win it with bishop d5, or you're going to have a lot of compensation on the light squares. Even if you don't win it, you're going to have very active position with lots of threats. Idea number 16 is going to be taking on f6 is not dangerous. So for example, in this position, the best move is to go to b5 with the bishop, preserving your light square bishop. However, a lot of players like to take on f6, and then black takes on c4, and then they take on g7. However, this idea has been known to be okay for black, and more than that, in this position, it is even better for black slightly, but it is better for the black pieces. This pawn is not really that dangerous because it will be won in the future, and black has a lot of counterplay for that pawn. So in this position, after c takes d4, bishop takes d4, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, we will get a queen exchange. We get lots of exchanges, knight to a3, stopping knight c2, but the problem is this pawn is now simply lost. So it's an end game, and the king being in the center is not going to be that big of an issue. So what's really going on here? If anything, black has an extra pawn. So this is going to be better for the black pieces, no matter how you put it, like bishop to e3, knight to f5, knight to b5, trying to go after c7, maybe even a7. But the problem is after knight takes, pawn takes, and a very simple king to d7, you're not going to be doing anything here with the white pieces. That's a big problem, and black is simply going to be better. I'm not going to go too far in depth because this is already a huge line, so I'm just going to go back. Just remember that taking on f6 and then taking on g7 is not dangerous for the black pieces, and if you're worried about not being able to castle with the black pieces, don't worry about it. This is totally fine. Okay, now let's come back to this position right here, and what I want you to look at is this knight specifically. Now in this position, if we play this move knight to c3, we already talked about this earlier, there's knight to a5 going after this bishop on c4. However, what we can do instead is play this move c3. This is a very good move, but now where do we develop this knight? And I want to show you this maneuver that is very, very useful for the white pieces. The knight from b1 goes to d2, it goes to f1, it goes to g3, and then from g3 it can either go to f5 or it can stay on g3, protecting the pawn on e4 in order to further help play d4. So in this position, let's say something like castles happens, we will move the rook to e1, let's say a6, and the play can continue something like this. The knight maneuvers around to g3, where it is very, very useful. Let's say black plays bishop to e7 here, after takes, rook takes, this knight can go to f5. You don't have to go to f5 right away because there might be d5. However, the knight on g3, just the ability to go to f5 is very useful, but also knight protects the pawn on e4, which is going to be very, very useful when we decide to execute this d4 move. Okay, earlier we talked about how taking here on e3 or taking on e6 for the white pieces is not exactly useful for each side. So for example, in this position, taking on e3 does not give us anything with the black pieces. If anything, it helps white because now this is a semi-open f-file. The pawn on e3 is very, very useful. So this is not a good transformation of the position. We don't actually want to take, we want to be taken instead. So in this position, we have two really good alternatives. Bishop to b6, which is very useful because if bishop takes, now we take with the a pawn and our rook opens up, so this is very useful. Or we can play this move d6, which looks counterintuitive at first, but it's actually very useful because after bishop takes c5, pawn takes e5, our control over the d4 square is greater. Our queen can go to d6, and this is just a very useful position for the black pieces. The dark square bishop is gone, and we have a very nice bind on the position. So this transformation of the position is actually very useful for black, and the doubled pawns are not a problem because it assists with the control of the center. So this is very useful. If our opponent ever plays c3 in the future now, in order to stop this, the d3 pawn has been weakened, and we can slowly start to put pressure on it with moves like, let's say, queen to d6, knight d2, we can go a6, and then we can do lots of different things. For example, let's say rook e1, b5, and then we can take this right away. So maybe a rook e1 is not a great example. Let's go queen e2 instead, and rook d8. We are putting tremendous amount of pressure on this pawn on d3. So this transformation of the position turns out to be very useful for the black pieces. Another very useful maneuver is maneuvering your queen to g3 in a lot of these positions. So for example, after bishop takes e3, pawn takes e3, what I want you to notice is that the f2 pawn is gone because it's on e3 now, and the way for the queen to go to g3 has been opened up. So queen e1, queen g3 is going to be a very, very useful idea after a couple of moves, something like this, let's say. The queen lands on g3 and it pins the g pawn. So there are going to be lots of tactical opportunities on the knight, lots of checkmating opportunities with ideas like knight h4, knight to f5, once again moving the knight to f5. This is also another very useful idea, and going after this pawn on g7. Or there could be tactical opportunities like knight takes e5 in this position, and then rook takes f6. So this maneuver of queen e1, queen g3 is very useful. It pressures the center, it pressures the king side, and the queen on g3 gives you lots of attacking opportunities. Idea number 20 is going to be playing f5 e4 in order to overwhelm white. So in a lot of these positions, the knight is on f6 and it's blocking the f pawn, and the best move in these types of positions is to actually move the knight to the center. This has three ideas in mind. First of all, the queen attacks the knight, so the knight has to move, it has to do something. This knight on d5 can sometimes go to f4, sometimes b4, going after this bishop, and this move also frees up this idea of playing f5. So for example, if the knight goes back, we will defend the pawn on e5, and after castles, we can castle as well, and then we can play f5, even here at the cost of this pawn, because after a move like queen to f6, this position is very dangerous for the white pieces. After g5 and potential g4, there is a huge attack brewing here. So for example, if something like knight to c3 is played, we can immediately go g4, and after captures, we will simply capture back. This knight does not have any good squares to go to, and this is going to be a very nice position for the black pieces. It's still very complicated because this is a bad structure for the black pieces. However, the position is very active for black because the light square bishop is locking in the dark square bishop, so it's hard for white to develop, but these positions are very comfortable for the black pieces. And going back, if this line doesn't happen and if something else happens, if this pawn is not taken in this position, well then what do you play? Let's say you move the bishop, you get hit with e4 immediately, and after a move like knight to d4, knight goes back, and you will set up so many different attacks on this white king that it's not even funny. Like if you think about just simply developing here, you're going to get absolutely obliterated here with a Greek gift. Takes here first, and then this queen can always go back to d6, and then it can also go to h6 in a lot of positions. This is a very powerful position for the black pieces. Another unique way to deal with this tension of the bishops and way to avoid it for the white pieces is to go to b5. Now, this is only possible when the a pawns have been pushed. So for example, in this position after a4, a5, this b5 square has been weakened. So if a move like bishop to e6 happens, we don't have to take it. We don't even have to defend it. If we want to avoid the trade of bishops, we can go bishop to b5, just like this, keeping all the pieces on the board. And this is also a very tricky move because there is a threat here. d4 is a huge threat. If you just castle in this position, you lose the game right away to d4. So after takes, the bishop is attacked, and after the bishop moves, there's d5 with a fork. So you have to be very careful with the black pieces. This bishop to b5 move is a good way to avoid a bishop trade, threaten a fork, and continue developing your pieces strategically. Another important idea that you have to know is to sacrifice the b pawn for development. So in a position like this, we can go b4, and this is the legendary Evans Gambit. And the goal here is to play c3 with a tempo. So the goal of the Italian is to execute d4, either with c3, d4, or d4 right away. We talked about this in the beginning of the video. However, if we play b4, we're actually speeding up this process, because after bishop takes, we can go c3 with a tempo. After the bishop moves, we can go d4 immediately. So we're wasting no time whatsoever, and we are taking the whole center. So this is a very important idea that is very useful, and this is something that you should study with the white pieces, because this is very dangerous to play. And after a move like queen to b3, queen d7, this pawn has to be protected. This is very dangerous for the black pieces. If black does not know what he's doing, he's going to find himself in a losing position very, very quickly. So remember that sacrificing this b pawn in order to get a lot of development is very useful. Idea number 23 is going to be to control f5. So in a lot of these positions, after a move like, let's say, bishop e7, bishop back to d3, now we will just simply continue developing with knight to c3. What we want to do is control these two squares. Black will play knight to d5 here at some point, preparing this move f5. However, we can meet that with a move like knight to g3, disallowing f5 because we are controlling that square 3 times. And if black makes a mistake here, if black makes even a suboptimal move, let's say a move like bishop to e6, this is already very problematic for him, because we can go bishop to f5 and control this square, not allow our opponent to actually play f5, and this will be very, very useful for the white pieces. If white is able to trade all the pieces off, well, white is up a pawn. So any king and pawn endgame is going to be winning for the white side, and controlling the f5 square helps white restrict black's activity. Idea number 24 is going to be knight on f5 is very, very dangerous. So in a lot of these positions, we already talked about this maneuver of maneuvering the knight over to g3. However, what we want to do ultimately in these types of positions is put one of the knights on f5. And when I say one of the knights, I mean that this knight will go out to h4. So we're not going to f5 right away, because bishop can take on f5. However, what we can do instead is play knight to h4, and let's say bishop to e6 is played. We can make this exchange. We can put the knight on f5 right now, and the knight on f5 is great because it controls all of these squares here. It cannot be kicked so easily because it would hang the h6 pawn. So the knight on f5 is on a semi-outpost right now, because g6 cannot be played because of tactical issues. And what you can do in a lot of these positions is bring the queen out to f3. In the future, maybe you can even move the knight and bring queen to g3, and you will get lots of attacking opportunities. And finally, idea number 25 is going to be to utilize the f-pawn for a pawn break. So in a lot of these positions, white will play a move like rook to e1, supporting the center, but the rook on e1 takes its eye off of the f2 square, which means that at a particular moment, we can play this move knight to g4. Now, we're not trying to take on f2, we're trying to create a threat, and after white defends it, rook to e2, we can play this move f5, because now the knight is no longer blocking the f-pawn. And this f5 move is very, very useful because it activates the black rook. It also challenges the center. And let's say a move like h3 happens, we drop the knight back. If our opponent dares to take this pawn, this will end very badly for them, because we will simply take this pawn back with the knight, and now this is open, this is open. The queen going to e8 and g6 is an idea. We talked about this, but in a slightly different situation earlier in the video, and this offers us a lot of attacking opportunities, and you have to be very, very quick here with the counterplay with white. You have to play d4. If you play slow moves, you're just going to be attacked brutally. So you need to be very, very quick, and you need to be very careful. Even moves like bishop to g5 are very dangerous, because after queen g6, this queen is now on the same line as the king, which creates even more chances. If you go for d4 right now, this might even lose the game because of bishop to d5, going after the knight and going after this bishop. So takes here, there's bishop takes f3, queen takes g5, and there are lots of opportunities for attacking. So remember to utilize this f5 pawn break, and if you're playing with the white pieces, f4 pawn break, it would be the equivalent to this.